Is someone playing violin in a machine shop? Clara Duval stopped mid-step, her voice low-sharp, almost accusatory as it cut through the sterile air of the corridor. No one answered, only the distant hum of overhead lights and the rhythmic hiss of hydraulic lines from the factory floor below. But the music persisted. Faint at first, like a whisper lost in the clang of metal, then rising, aching, deliberate, heartbreakingly human. It didn't belong here. Not among steel and circuits. Not in a facility that built systems designed for war. She turned toward the sound, instinctively heels clicking across the concrete with a precision that mirrored her every habit. Clara didn't detour. She didn't veer off course. But the violin, it unraveled something inside her, something ancient and unfinished. She passed rows of silent machines and workstations tucked neatly beneath overhanging pipes. Everything around her smelled like oil and heated metal. And still the violin sang. Debussy, Clair de Lune. Clara halted at the edge of a wide maintenance bay. She ducked behind a column, not out of fear, but reverence, like she was intruding on a sacred space. The music floated from the far side of the room where a single workbench had been cleared. And there he was. A man in a gray maintenance uniform back turned to her head, bowed slightly, drawing a bow across an old violin with worn grace. His shoulders were strong but soft in posture, relaxed in a way no one ever was in her boardrooms. And beside him on a low wooden stool sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9. Barefoot, her socks mismatched. Her arms rested on her knees as she colored quietly with stubby crayons, utterly undisturbed by the haunting elegance of the music around her. No phone, no screen, just her and the sound. Clara stared, not just because it was beautiful, but because it didn't make sense. No one had told her there was a musician on staff, and certainly not in the maintenance division. The man's hands were calloused, clearly used to wrenches and steel bolts, not fine instruments. And yet the way he played, he didn't just know the music. He felt it. Every note held something deeper, as though it had been kept alive not through sheet music, but necessity. Clara took a slow breath, then reached for her tablet to check his badge ID from a distance. But she stopped herself. She didn't want data right now. She wanted to feel this, whatever this was. The last note lingered like the final whisper of a dream. The man let the bow fall gently to his side and smiled first at the violin, then at the girl. "That's your favorite, isn't it?" he asked her. The girl didn't speak. She nodded once, then handed him a drawing. He looked at it, chuckled quietly, and held it up to the light. A crayon sketch of 2 stick figures, one holding a violin, the other with bright yellow headphones. Above them, a giant sun and musical notes floating like stars. "It's our lunchtime concert poster, huh?" he said. "You're the artist, and I'm the background noise." The girl grinned. Clara smiled despite herself. Then, as if sensing something or someone, the man turned. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Clara saw him stiffen slightly, not out of fear but caution. His smile faded. The air shifted. Clara stepped forward, heels now echoing across the concrete like gavel strikes. "I wasn't aware music was part of the maintenance protocol," she said coolly, voice steady. He blinked once, then nodded respectfully. "It's not," I figured, she replied. "And yet, you're here." "I am." And Clara motioned to the girl who now sat very still, wide-eyed, but calm. "She's my daughter. I pick her up from school during my lunch break. Her classroom's 5 blocks away. I bring her here for an hour. Then she goes back. That's not standard company procedure." "No," he said, placing the violin back into its case. "It's not." There was no apology in his tone, only honesty. Clara tilted her head slightly. "You could be reported for this." He looked her dead in the eyes. "Then I'll take the report." It wasn't defiance. It was conviction. Quiet, unflinching. The kind that didn't shout to be heard but didn't shrink to please either. Clara stepped closer. "You know who I am?" she asked. "Yes, and you're still willing to play symphonies during lunch hour with your child in a restricted area." The man looked at his daughter, who was now watching him, as if her world depended on what he would say next. "I'd rather she hear beauty in the middle of steel than silence in the middle of safety," he replied, "even if it costs me." Clara didn't expect that answer. She didn't expect any of this. Not the music, not the man, and certainly not the memory that now clawed its way from the locked room in her mind. She turned sharply. "I'll pretend I didn't see anything. Just this once." He nodded. "Thank you." But she didn't leave. She stood still, the echo of his words repeating in her mind. Better beauty in steel than silence in safety. Something inside her shifted, but she wasn't ready to name it. Instead, she asked without turning back, "What's your name, Ethan?" "Ethan Hale." She hesitated. "Then I'm Clara." He already knew that. Everyone in the building knew her name. It was engraved on their emails, embossed on their contracts, and whispered in caution. But this time, she wanted him to hear it from her. Human, not CEO. Clara turned finally, her face unreadable. But as she reached the hallway again and disappeared behind the doors, her hands were trembling just slightly. In her chest, something stirred. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was something more dangerous than either. It was curiosity, and the echo of a violin that somehow had found its way past every wall she'd ever built. She didn't intend to come back. Clara Duval didn't make emotional detours. Her schedule was airtight, optimized to the minute. Her calendar didn't allow for curiosity or violin lunches in the machine shop. And yet, 23 hours and 16 minutes after she walked away from that echoing note and that stubborn man with the quiet fire in his eyes, she was back. No driver, no assistant, no boardroom in sight. Just Clara alone in her charcoal slacks, a simple blouse instead of her usual blazer, walking toward the factory gates like someone who had lost something and wasn't yet sure what it was. She stopped just outside the tinted hallway windows that overlooked the maintenance bay, the same spot she had stood yesterday. And there they were again, Ethan Hale and his daughter. Mia sat cross-legged on the floor beside a small box of crayons, her head tilted slightly as she scribbled over thick sketch paper. Her tongue peeked out from the side of her mouth in deep focus. Her headphones, bright yellow with a unicorn sticker peeling off the side, were looped around her neck instead of on her ears. Ethan stood by his workbench, violin in hand, tightening the bow with the precision of a man who knew every creak of the wood. Then, without ceremony, he lifted the instrument and began to play. No warm-up, no hesitation, just sound. Raw, honest, achingly present. This time, it wasn't Debussy. It was something older, slower. A folk melody Clara couldn't place but felt like she had known in a dream, once soft-winding, full of the kind of sorrow that doesn't ask for pity. Clara found herself sitting down on the bench in the hallway, just to listen. She didn't realize how tightly she had been holding her breath until the bow lifted and silence returned. Inside, Ethan gently set the violin down and knelt beside Mia. She showed him her drawing. He nodded with approval, then said something Clara couldn't hear, something that made the little girl smile and tuck the paper into her backpack with exaggerated care. That smile hit Clara like a wave. A small, simple moment. But it stayed with her. She rose and, without fully knowing why, walked into the bay. Ethan looked up as the heavy door creaked open. His expression was neutral, but not unkind. Mia looked too, but didn't react. She simply returned to her drawing. "I didn't expect to see you again," Ethan said, straightening. Clara answered without thinking. "Neither did I." They stood there, unspeaking, the air full of invisible things. "I wasn't sure if you were going to file a complaint," he added. "I still might," Clara said. A pause. Then she smiled faintly. "I didn't come here as a CEO today." "Then what did you come as? I don't know yet," she admitted. That seemed to land. Ethan nodded once and motioned to the workbench stool beside his. "You can sit, if you want." Clara hesitated, then crossed the floor and sat legs crossed neatly at the ankle posture like she was still at a shareholder meeting, except her fingers were clenched a little too tightly in her lap. He didn't press. Instead, Ethan poured 2 cups of lukewarm coffee from a thermos and offered her one. Clara took it surprised. "I didn't bring you one yesterday," he said, matter of fact, "and I was raised not to let guests sit empty-handed." "I wasn't a guest yesterday," she said. "Maybe not," he replied, "but you're here now." It was a simple exchange, but it carried weight. "Your daughter Clara began. She's on the spectrum." He nodded. "Autism spectrum disorder, diagnosed at 4. She seems—" Clara trailed off, searching for the right word. "Complicated," Ethan offered with a quiet grin. "Most brilliant things are." Clara chuckled softly. "That's not what I was going to say. But yes, she's nonverbal most days, has sensory issues, loves music and art, hates crowds, loves thunderstorms, hates tags in her shirts, and absolutely refuses to eat green M&Ms. Clara laughed, a real laugh, short but honest. "She looks happy," she said. Ethan looked toward Mia and softened. "She is. Here. Only here." He turned back to Clara. "This place, it's the one place she doesn't have to apologize for being who she is. She knows every echo, every corner. It's safe for her. But this isn't a daycare," Clara pointed out. "No," he said. "It's sanctuary." That word hung between them like incense. Clara took a long breath. "I've signed 100 budgets in my life, read through thousands of reports, optimized operations in ways that made entire divisions cheer. But I've never seen anything like this. Like a father turning a machine bay into a symphony hall. Like a little girl smiling with crayons instead of medication. Like music still finding its place in the middle of metal and noise." Ethan watched her closely. "You don't strike me as someone who forgets the sound of things," he said. Clara's fingers stiffened on the coffee cup. "I had a brother," she said quietly. "Much younger, diagnosed at 3. My parents called it a condition. They didn't want to talk about it. Or about him, really." Ethan didn't interrupt. One day, he was just gone. And no one explained anything. Grief in my family came in forms of silence and avoidance. So I learned to be excellent. To be sharp. Loud enough in my success that no one would ask about the quiet. She looked down, then back at Mia. Until yesterday. Ethan set his cup down. "My daughter doesn't need the world to change for her," he said. "She just needs it to stop asking her to change for it." Clara closed her eyes. That sentence would stay with her. "Would it be all right?" she said softly. "If I came again," Ethan tilted his head. "To listen." She shook her head. "To learn." A long silence. Then he smiled, small but real. "Bring your own violin next time." "I don't know how to play," she said. He looked at her like it didn't matter at all. "Then you'll fit right in." The factory lights flickered above them, and somewhere deep inside Clara's chest something stirred that hadn't moved in years. Not in boardrooms, not in penthouses, not in champagne toasts. Here, in the hum of machines and the stillness of a father's devotion, here something began again. And it sounded like music. "I saved you a spot," Mia said. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but clear. Clear enough that it silenced the hum of machines and made Ethan look up in surprise. Clara blinked. The girl had spoken. To her. Clara turned slowly toward Mia, who stood by the workbench with a folded blanket in her arms. She laid it on the cold metal surface with great care, smoothing the corners as if it were a fine linen tablecloth. "Table for 3, Mia added, her eyes fixed on the space between them. Ethan looked stunned, but only for a moment. Then he gave Clara a small nod, half permission, half disbelief. "She doesn't usually talk to people," he said under his breath. "Not this soon." Clara took a step forward. "Then I must be in excellent company." Mia didn't smile, but she handed Clara a plastic spoon and a paper napkin as if this were a proper restaurant. Clara accepted both like they were made of gold. Lunch was simple: 2 thermoses of soup, 3 mismatched cups, and slices of grilled cheese wrapped in foil. Mia sat cross-legged atop a milk crate. Clara and Ethan sat on inverted buckets. There was no table, no chairs, no menu, but there was something else in the air. Presence. Clara watched Mia carefully how the girl tapped the corner of her sandwich before every bite, how she lined her crayons in perfect color order beside her soup, how she didn't meet eyes but listened with her whole posture. "She's brilliant," Clara said quietly. "You know that." Ethan nodded. "She doesn't always show it the way people expect. But yeah, she is. Does she speak often?" "No. And not because she can't. It's more like she chooses her moments." Clara smiled gently. "Then I'm honored." Mia tilted her head at Clara, then picked up her crayon and started to draw on a fresh sheet of paper. No one asked what it was. They ate in comfortable silence until Clara glanced at Mia's sketch and froze. 3 stick figures again, one tall with short hair and a violin, one small with pigtails and crayons, and one woman in a white shirt and red shoes. All 3 were seated at a table. Above them, Mia had written carefully deliberately, "My Music Family." Clara stared at the words. They weren't just childlike. They were true. Ethan leaned over and gave the drawing a once-over. He didn't say anything, but something flickered in his eyes. A crack in the quiet armor he wore like second skin. "She thinks in metaphor," he said softly. "Music, color drawings. That's her language, and she's letting me speak it." "She's inviting you to the table," he replied. "Most people never get that." Clara folded her napkin, suddenly unsure of what to do with her hands. She'd closed million-dollar contracts without blinking, but this small gesture from a child carried a weight that unsettled her. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked. Ethan looked up. "Scared of what the—" "You're all she has. That one mistake, one wrong decision might cost her more than you can fix." Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Every single day." His voice was steady, not ashamed, not weak, just true. She had a full support team once, therapists, an art teacher who understood her, music sessions twice a week, and then budget cuts, school programs slashed, staff rotated out. Suddenly, all she had was me. I wasn't trained for this. "You adapted," Clara said. "I had no choice. And that's the thing, parents like me, we don't get the luxury of not showing up, whether we're ready or not." Clara set down her cup, her gaze lowering to the table between them. "My brother loved music," she said quietly. "He didn't speak much either. But he used to hum while I read to him. He was always in his own world. But when I played piano, he came closer." She paused. "He passed away when I was 16. Nobody really talked about how or why. My parents, they buried it. And I think I buried parts of myself with him." Ethan listened, not with pity, just with the kind of silence that welcomes truth. "I haven't played music since she whispered. Until I heard yours." Ethan looked at her, then really looked at her. There was a different kind of recognition in his eyes now. Not curiosity, not suspicion, something like alignment. "He would have liked this," Clara added, nodding toward Mia's sketch. "Table for 3. She's rewriting the story," Ethan said, "for both of us." Mia, oblivious to the emotional current flowing between the adults, stood and offered her paper to Clara. Then, in a gesture so deliberate it made Clara's breath hitch, she picked up her spoon and gently clinked it against Clara's like a toast. No words, but the message rang clear. "You belong here." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and raised her spoon in return. "To the music family," she said. Ethan joined them. 3 spoons. One fragile, beautiful sound in the middle of steel and silence. And for a moment, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Home. As they packed up, Mia tugged on Clara's sleeve and held up a small drawing of a violin. Beneath it, in careful block letters, she had written, "Play with us next time." Clara looked at Ethan, who shrugged with a smirk. "You're invited," she laughed. "I don't even know how to hold a violin," good Ethan said. "Means you'll be humble." Mia giggled just once, but it was enough to echo inside Clara's chest for the rest of the day. As they walked out of the bay, Clara stopped at the door, looked back and said, "You know, I came here to audit operations." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what did you find?" She smiled. "Something that doesn't fit the report, but feels undeniably necessary." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because that day 3 people sat at a table made of scrap metal and paper napkins. And something holy happened. Something no metric could measure. Something no spreadsheet could predict. The beginning of healing, wrapped in crayon lines, grilled cheese, and a child's invitation to belong. The old storage closet hadn't been opened in years. The hinges groaned in protest as Clara pulled the door back with both hands. A cloud of dust spiraled upward, dancing in the sunlight that bled through the narrow attic window. She coughed once, waving the air aside, and stepped inside. Everything was exactly where she remembered and exactly how she'd left it. Boxes of childhood belongings lined up like forgotten soldiers, each one neatly labeled in her mother's careful cursive. Clara, age 6. Clara, school papers. Daniel, art supplies. Daniel, music. She stared at the last label, her fingers hovering. Daniel. Just the name made her chest tighten. She knelt on the floor, slowly prying the flaps open. Inside were crumpled sheets of construction paper, dulled over time but still bursting with uneven strokes of color. Crayon suns with crooked smiles. Scribbled musical notes over stick figures dancing. A foam cut out of a violin with glitter glued onto the strings. And then folded carefully in tissue, a tiny red hoodie. She picked it up, pressed it to her face. It still smelled faintly like childhood apple shampoo peanut butter and the ghost of a little boy who had once followed her everywhere, humming quietly to himself. Clara sat there for a long time, cross-legged on the hardwood floor until her legs went numb and the light in the attic began to dim. She didn't cry. Not then. But her silence was the kind that screamed. Later that night in her apartment, Clara stood in front of her grand piano for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The black lacquer gleamed untouched, immaculate, a monument to her success and her grief all at once. She opened the lid. The keys stared back at her like questions she had no answers for. Her fingers trembled as she placed them down. She played a single chord, then another. It was clumsy, hesitant, like a forgotten language being remembered in fragments. She didn't try to impress. She just let it hurt. And somewhere between D minor and a broken A, she whispered into the empty room. "I'm sorry, Danny." The apology dissolved into silence, but it didn't vanish. It sank into the music. The next day, Clara arrived at the factory carrying something she hadn't touched in years, a violin case. Ethan raised an eyebrow when he saw it. "You came prepared," he said. Clara gave him a look. "Don't get excited. I still don't know what I'm doing." "That's the first step," Ethan replied. "Not knowing." Mia clapped once delighted and motioned toward a folded chair beside her. She had set up a tiny semicircle of stools around their makeshift stage. A plastic flower pot sat in the center with a sign, "Today's Special Harmony." Clara grinned. "Did she make this?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Every morning she packs it in her backpack. Says if the music is good, the flowers grow better." Clara shook her head in awe. "She's magical." Ethan looked at Mia, who was now drawing a sunflower with a violin at the center. "She is. She really is." They began slowly. Clara followed Ethan's lead, mimicking finger placement, learning how to feel the string under tension. Mia offered no instruction, just presence. She listened, tilted her head, and occasionally tapped a rhythm on the floor. There was no critique, no correction, only invitation. At one point, Clara let out a frustrated sigh. This feels impossible. I'm used to mastering things, not fumbling through them like a toddler. Ethan set his bow down. Mastery is overrated. Fumbling means you're present. Clara turned to him. How did you learn my wife? He said softly. She taught me. Clara froze. You were married 6 years. Lost her to an aneurysm while she was putting Mia to bed. No warning, no time to say goodbye. The words landed heavy. Clara didn't respond. She just listened, like Ethan had done for her. She was the musician, he continued. I was the guy with tools and oil stains. But after she passed, Mia kept searching for the sound. She'd sit by the piano waiting, every day. So, I picked up her violin. I played the only song I remembered. Badly. But Mia stopped crying. Ethan looked away, then back again. I've been playing ever since. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound small. So Clara offered what she could. Then you're not just a father, she said. You're a bridge. He gave a tired smile. Some days I feel like a rope about to snap. Clara's voice dropped. I know that feeling. They sat in silence for a beat too long. Then Mia broke the tension by placing a new drawing in Clara's lap. It was the same 3 figures from before, Ethan, Mia, Clara. But this time all 3 were holding violins. The word family was scrawled beneath them in large, colorful letters. Clara touched the paper like it was something sacred. This is the most expensive drawing I've ever earned, she joked. Ethan smiled. She only draws what she believes. Clara looked at him, then back at Mia, who had already moved on to doodling flowers and treble clefs. Does she remember your wife? Clara asked. Ethan nodded. She doesn't say her name, but sometimes she plays a note that sounds exactly like her mother's lullaby. I think it's still inside her. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. You're raising her beautifully. Ethan looked down at his rough hands. I'm just trying not to break her. You're not, Clara said. If anything, she's healing you. He met her gaze then, and for a moment there was no noise, no humming machines, no distant alarms, just the quiet space where 2 people recognize a piece of themselves in someone else. Why are you really here? Clara Ethan asked. She didn't blink. I don't know, she said, but every time I hear your music, I stop running. He nodded slowly, and said the words that would echo in her long after the day was done. Then maybe this place isn't where things end. He reached out, tapped her violin case. Maybe it's where something begins. Clara sat in her office, motionless, the early morning light painting long shadows across the glass walls. Her screen glowed quietly in front of her, displaying an internal report she hadn't seen in 3 years. At least, not with these eyes. Quarterly Operational Cost Review. West Division Line Item 47, Supplemental Programs. Art Music Therapy terminated. Q2, Fiscal Year 3, authorized by C. Duvall. Her name, right there, in bold, signed, approved, efficient. 3 years ago, she'd seen the report as just another box to check. Another recommendation from the finance team. A series of red numbers and green solutions. She had skimmed the executive summary, trusted the projections, clicked approve, and moved on to the next meeting, the next deal. Now. Every line of that decision screamed, we believe this therapy group contributes little to defense-related outcomes. Consolidation will result in a projected 2.3% annual savings. Impact on employee morale negligible. She leaned back, her stomach hollow. Mia's drawing sat folded in her handbag. A table for 3. Music family. She'd cut the program that gave that child her voice. Clara closed her laptop with trembling fingers and stood. She didn't hesitate, didn't email for a meeting, didn't call ahead. She just got in her car and drove. Mrs. Kim lived in a small house just outside the industrial district, surrounded by wind chimes and flower pots that bloomed defiantly in rusted cans. Clara found her kneeling in the dirt-gloved hands deep in soil, humming softly as she coaxed life from a patch of stubborn violets. "You're taller than I thought you'd be," Mrs. Kim said without looking up, "and you drive too fast on a quiet street." Clara blinked. "You knew I was coming. I've worked with children who don't speak. I know how to listen." She stood and peeled off her gloves. "And I saw the report in your eyes before you stepped out of the car." Clara let out a shaky breath. "Then you already know why I'm here." "I know you're looking for a way to undo something," Mrs. Kim replied. "But some things can't be undone. Only understood." "I didn't mean to take anything from them," Clara said. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," the older woman said gently. "There's a difference." That landed hard. Mrs. Kim motioned to the porch. "Sit." Clara obeyed, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Mia used to come to my music group every Tuesday," Mrs. Kim began. "When she first started, she screamed through the entire session, hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. No words, no eye contact." Clara nodded silent. "But one afternoon we played a single note on the cello open G. Just held it steady. And her body stilled. Her breathing changed. She looked straight at me. And for the first time, she hummed." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't need instructions. She needed resonance, Mrs. Kim said. And that room gave her 1 hour a week where the world didn't ask her to bend, where she didn't have to mask her wonder just to survive. "I took that away from her," Clara whispered. "No," Mrs. Kim corrected. "You didn't take it from her. You took it from all of them." The porch fell silent, broken only by the low clinking of the wind chimes in the breeze. "Do you want to know what bothered me the most?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "That I didn't remember. Not until now. I signed it like it meant nothing, because back then it didn't to you." Clara looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. "So, what do I do now?" Mrs. Kim studied her. "You listen louder than you lead. You rebuild what you broke. And most importantly, you show up again and again until your presence means more than your apology." That night, Clara returned home and opened her personal archives. She requested every financial document she'd signed in the last 5 years, every cost-cutting order, every terminated initiative. She searched for patterns, names, lives hidden behind percentages. The next morning, she walked into the factory earlier than usual. The machinery hadn't started yet. The bay was still soft with the light of a new day. Ethan was already there tightening the strings on his violin. Mia sat nearby drawing a treble clef made entirely of sunflowers. Clara didn't speak right away. She simply approached and sat beside them. When Ethan glanced at her, she spoke carefully. Not as a CEO. Not even as Clara Duval, the woman who had everything, but as someone who had been wrong and knew it. "I found the report," she said. "I'm the one who cut the program." Ethan froze. Mia stopped coloring. "I didn't know who it would affect. I didn't let myself know. I saw a number and thought I was making a smart choice. I didn't see the room where your daughter found her first note." Ethan's voice was quiet. "You didn't just cut a budget, Clara. You silenced her world." Clara nodded, tears brimming. "I know, and I can't undo that. But if you'll let me, I want to help rebuild it." There was a pause, a long one. Then Mia reached over and placed her drawing in Clara's lap. Another table, another trio, but this time they were holding hands, and the word beneath it read, "Try again." Ethan watched the exchange. He didn't smile, but he didn't walk away either, and that was enough. Clara held the drawing close to her chest and whispered, "I will." Then louder, "I will try again. And I won't stop trying." In the quiet that followed, Ethan lifted his violin and began to play. This time Clara listened like it was the only sound that mattered. Because in truth, it was. Absolutely. Here's the continuation. "I'm not here to impress you," Clara said, standing awkwardly in the break room clutching a violin case that clearly hadn't been opened in years. "I'm here because I need to feel something again. And I think music remembers what I forgot." Ethan didn't answer at first. He stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the midday sun streak through the dust-speckled glass. Mia was sitting on the floor a few feet away, focused on arranging colorful paper clips into shapes on a rubber mat. A treble clef was slowly taking form. He turned finally. "You want me to teach you to play?" Clara opened the case. The violin inside had scratches along the chin rest, the strings loose, the wood slightly warped but still intact. "It was my brother's," she said. "He passed when we were kids. He used to play while I sat by the door pretending I wasn't listening." Ethan's expression softened. He took a few steps forward, inspecting the instrument carefully. "Then we'll tune it," he said. "And you'll play. Not to sound perfect, but to listen back to the part of you that stopped speaking when he did." Clara looked up, startled. "You don't teach music like an engineer. Music taught me how to be a father, not an engineer." His voice was quiet, steady. They began that afternoon. It started with scales, painfully slow, awkward hand positions, wrong bow angles, and more than a few squealing notes that made Mia wince and cover her ears. But Clara kept going. Every note that sounded wrong became a kind of confession. Every correction from Ethan a kind of forgiveness. "Relax your wrist," he murmured. "You're trying to control the sound. Let it surprise you." "That's dangerous," she said with a shaky laugh. "That's music." Day after day they practiced during the lunch hour. Mia would sometimes sit nearby, other times disappear behind an easel to draw in silence. But she always listened. One Tuesday, Clara showed up earlier than usual. She had been up all night practicing a short melody from a children's lullaby. She wanted to surprise Mia. She played it, halting, breathless, but with unmistakable heart. Mia looked up, stood, walked slowly toward her, and, without a word, picked up a tiny wooden violin Ethan had carved for her long ago. She lifted it to her chin and played the next line. Perfectly. Clara's eyes welled. Ethan blinked hard, caught between awe and disbelief. Clara whispered, "That wasn't planned." "No," Ethan said, his voice thick. "That was presence." The next day they played together, the three of them. Not a performance, a conversation. Clara's violin voice was unsure but reaching. Ethan's grounding and warm. Mia's clear as spring water. Mrs. Kim, who had been invited quietly by Ethan, sat in the back and wiped her cheeks with a floral handkerchief. "You've built a room without walls," she whispered to herself. And the child walked right in. That evening, Clara and Ethan stood near the service exit, steam curling from their coffee mugs in the chill air. "She played with us," Clara said, still shaken. "She hasn't done that in years," Ethan replied. "Not since her mom." Clara looked at him. "She remembers through music." Ethan nodded. "She trusts through it." Then after a pause, "And so do I." Clara turned to him. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her carefully, but she stopped. Not yet, not when the music was finally speaking. Later she said, "When the time is right." He didn't push. He simply took another sip of his coffee and nodded like a man who had learned to wait for the melody to come to him. Before they parted, Clara turned and asked, "What am I learning?" Really, Ethan's answer was quiet but unforgettable. "I'm not teaching you how to play violin, Clara. I'm teaching you how to stay in the moment, without needing to run from it." That night, Clara played alone in her apartment. The bow shook less. The notes wavered, but they stayed. And for the first time since she was a girl, she fell asleep not to silence, but to the sound of her own heart finally quietly tuning itself back into something resembling music. Absolutely. Here's the next chapter. Clara stood alone in the boardroom. Sunlight poured in through the tall glass windows, pooling across the long oak table like a spotlight. But she didn't feel seen. She felt small, like she had wandered into a war room armed only with a violin case and a notebook filled with ideas that didn't have a column for profit. Across from her sat the executive board, 6 men, 1 woman, sharp suits, sharper eyes. At the head of the table, Brian Porter, Chief Financial Officer, face unreadable, but lips pressed in permanent disapproval. Clara took a breath. Effective immediately, she began, her voice steady. I propose reinstating the Harmony Initiative across all 6 manufacturing sites. Music therapy, sensory rooms, partnership with retired specialists and child development centers in each region. Dead silence. Then a short laugh from Brian. You want us to fund music classes, he said flatly. In a weapons facility. Clara didn't flinch. No, I want us to fund healing. Clara, the woman in legal, said gently. The board just approved a 9% cut across all non-engineering expenditures. You're talking about reversing that and adding cost. Clara nodded. Yes, because I went to one of our factories and I saw something that doesn't show up on your spreadsheets. I saw a 9-year-old girl, nonverbal, bright as sunlight, who used to speak through music. Until we took it away. You can't run a business on emotion, Brian said, his voice tightening. No, Clara said, but you also can't run a business without a soul. Another silence, the kind that doesn't fall. It drops. Brian leaned forward. You're paid to increase shareholder value. That is your legal responsibility. You're not a counselor, Clara. You're a CEO. Clara stepped closer. And what if value isn't just a number, she asked. What if it's the kind of legacy we leave behind in these towns, in these kids? He shook his head, then flicked a hand toward the others. Unless the board moves to vote, otherwise this discussion is closed. Clara didn't back down. Instead, she opened the small folder in her hand and spread out printed photos across the table. Ethan and Mia playing violin among broken gear wheels. Mia's drawing of Table for 3. A quote from Mrs. Kim, handwritten in the corner. When a child finds music, she finds herself. And then one last page, a full proposal marked Harmony Initiative in bold type. This isn't sentiment, Clara said quietly. It's design. For community retention. For worker wellness. For lowering turnover and building trust between the company and the people who make our machines function. Brian didn't look up, but someone else did. Michael Tran from operations cleared his throat. She has a point. Absentee rates in the West Ridge facility dropped 18% the year they had that therapy room open. That's hard data. Brian shot him a look. We're not running an after-school program. No, Clara replied, but maybe we should start acting like the people building our future deserve to feel safe, supported, and human. There it was, the line that hung in the air. Brian's voice hardened. I'll be frank. If you keep pushing this agenda, we'll be forced to call a vote of no confidence. Clara blinked. I'm sorry, she said softly. I forgot how small your world really is. The room froze. You can measure quarterly profits in your neat little charts, Brian. But out there, out in the real world, a father plays a violin in a cold factory corner because it's the only way his daughter doesn't disappear into silence. Her voice cracked, but she didn't step back. I was that girl once, Clara whispered, only no one played for me. So now I play for her, for all of them. The room stayed quiet for a long beat. I won't apologize for trying to make this place worthy of the people who show up every day to hold it together, she added. If that costs me my title, then so be it. Brian looked away, and Clara walked out not defeated, but decided. That night, she drove for hours, past the city lights through long winding rural roads until the GPS faded and memory took over. She parked outside a small, unused community building near the original Harmony Pilot Center. It had been locked for years. But Clara had keys. She was the one who had ordered it shuttered. The room inside was dusty, abandoned, but not dead. In one corner, a faded mural of children holding hands around a globe still clung to the wall. Clara turned on her flashlight. There in the storage closet lay the old sheet music cabinet half open, a few pieces fluttering from the breeze of her entrance. She sat on the bench, pulled the old violin from its case, and began to play. Her fingers slipped. The notes cracked. But she played. Not for the board, not for approval. For Mia. For Ethan. For the girl she had been the one who had stood outside her brother's door listening but never brave enough to knock. Later that week, back in her office, Clara drafted the first press release for the Harmony Initiative. She wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She sent the pitch to a few journalists she trusted, human interest writers, mental health advocates, one local parenting blogger with a massive following and a soft spot for neurodiverse children. And when the interview requests began trickling in, she didn't hesitate. She looked into the camera and said, "I made a mistake. Years ago, I signed a line that stole music from a child. Now, I intend to give it back, not as a donation, as a promise." Her voice, raw but unwavering, echoed across living rooms, lunchrooms, and laptops across the country. And in one small living room on the edge of town, a little girl who hadn't spoken in days watched the screen and smiled. "Daddy, look!" Mia's voice was barely above a whisper, but it broke through the hum of the washing machine like a violin string snapping. Ethan looked up from the laundry basket. Mia stood in the hallway clutching a crinkled manila folder to her chest. Her cheeks were flushed not with fear, but pride. "I found it," she said softly, handing it over. "It's mine." Ethan dried his hands on a towel, puzzled. "Where did you get this?" She pointed to the bottom of her backpack. It was under the violin case. He opened the folder slowly, careful not to bend the edges. Inside were colored drawings or drawings from 2, maybe 3 years ago. Swirls of purple and gold erratic lines slowly taking shape. On the final page, a single word in blocky, trembling letters: music. But behind the artwork, something else. A stapled report, company letterhead, internal memo, budget red lines, and a signature: C. Duvall. His breath caught. He read the lines once, then again. The document wasn't vague. It was clear. 3 years ago, a new executive order slashed all non-essential programs across regional plants, including the music therapy pilot, the one that had brought Mia out of silence. His hands clenched. The folder crinkled. Clara was at the center, guiding a team through the setup of Harmony's first pilot room: fresh painted walls, donated string instruments, a box of weighted blankets. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She looked free. Ethan entered without knocking. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, but it echoed too loudly in the quiet room. She looked up. Her smile faltered. "Of course." They stepped into a side hallway lined with unlit classroom doors. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It pressed. He held up the folder. "Do you recognize this?" She froze. He flipped it open and pointed to the signature. "You signed it," he said. 3 years ago. You were the one who shut it all down." "Ethan," her voice was quiet, but he cut her off. "My daughter." She spoke her first full sentence in that room. She drew her first picture there. And one day, it was gone. No warning, no explanation, just silence again. You cut her voice. I didn't know she started, but her words tripped over guilt. You didn't know he snapped. You walked into that plant, heard a song, and saw a girl, and you didn't even realize you were the one who took her color away. Clara's lips trembled. I found the memo weeks ago. I've been trying to fix it, but you didn't tell me. He stepped closer. You let me teach you music. Let my daughter love you. And all that time you were carrying a truth heavy enough to break both of us. She looked down. I didn't know how to say it. I thought if I could just build something better, something real. Ethan's voice cracked. You don't erase betrayal with violin lessons, Clara. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I was a different person then, she said softly. A woman, trained to trim the fat, hit the numbers, stay cold. I didn't even read the detail, I just signed. Because that's what leaders do, write push paper. Follow logic. And God forgive me, I thought that was enough. He shook his head slowly. I opened up my life to you. I let Mia open hers. And all along, you were the reason she went quiet in the first place. There was nothing left to say. She didn't chase him when he walked away. She didn't try. That night, Clara sat alone in the old therapy room. No lights, no music, just shadows on the wall and the dull hum of a building trying to heal. She held her violin in her lap like it was something fragile. A confession. She lifted the bow, drew it across the strings. The first note broke, the second trembled, the third found its place. She kept playing. Not perfectly, not even well, but honestly. And somewhere between the wrong notes and the pain of silence, something inside her cracked open not like glass shattering, but like earth splitting before a tree grows through. Mia hadn't spoken all evening. Not a word, not even a hum. Ethan watched her from the doorway as she curled into her blanket, the same one Mrs. Kim had gifted years ago. He sat beside her, pulled the drawings from the folder, and laid them out one by one. I didn't mean to make you feel confused, he said softly. Grown-ups. Sometimes we forget how much truth matters. She didn't look up. But you were right, kiddo. Music is how we talk when words don't work. He reached for the last page. The one she drew just yesterday. 3 people sitting on a bench, one with a violin, one with a wrench, and one with a sketchpad full of stars. At sunrise, Clara typed her resignation letter. Short, direct. No apologies, but full of meaning. I no longer wish to lead a company that confuses silence for success. My future belongs to the voices I once ignored. The Harmony Initiative will live on, with or without me. She signed it, put down the pen, and for the first time in years felt lighter. Outside, in the quiet morning fog, the sky slowly opened like a curtain, and from the edge of the parking lot, Clara spotted a small figure, golden curls bouncing with each step. Mia, walking toward her sketchpad in hand. Behind her, Ethan followed, hesitant, unsure. Mia walked right up to Clara, looked her in the eyes, and opened the pad. A single drawing. Just 3 words. You came back. Clara knelt, a voice cracking. I never meant to leave. Mia held out her hand, small and warm. Clara took it, and Ethan, standing a few feet away, finally let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Forgiveness wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just a girl holding your hand after all the music had stopped, and saying in her own way, let's play again. The silence came back like an old storm. Not loud, not violent, just present. Like a fog that never lifted. Ethan watched Mia from the kitchen doorway. She sat on the floor in her pajamas, knees drawn to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. The sketchpad lay untouched beside her. No colors, no sound, no sparkle in her eyes. It had been 2 days. 2 days since Clara told the truth. 2 days since Ethan walked out. 2 days since Mia spoke, smiled, or even picked up her crayon. He crouched beside her gently. Hey, Bug, want some pancakes? No response. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I added blueberries this time. Your favorite. Still nothing. Just silence. Thick and still. He stood slowly and left the plate on the table. He didn't expect her to touch it. She didn't. At the old therapy wing, Clara stood alone in what used to be the music room. The walls still carried faint outlines where paintings once hung, Mia's included. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The light switch didn't work. She didn't try again. Instead, she sat on the floor back against the far wall, knees pulled close like a child waiting for someone who never came. She held the violin across her lap bow, resting beside it. No music, no audience, just air and echoes. And regret. She raised the bow hands, trembling. The first note cracked. So did the second. By the third, her throat tightened, but she didn't stop. She kept playing, broken as it was, because something inside her knew. Some apologies can't be spoken. They have to be played. At the executive tower, the boardroom buzzed like a hornet's nest. Brian Porter tossed a file onto the table. "You want to turn a defense plant into a music school?" Clara didn't blink. "I want to create a therapy program that helps our employees and their children. Starting here. Starting now." Another member scoffed. "This is a public company. You think shareholders care about violin lessons?" Clara folded her hands, calm but steady. "They will when they see what healing looks like." Brian leaned forward. "We're already weeks behind on contracts. Profits dipped 2% last quarter. You want to add a PR nightmare to that." She met his gaze evenly. "No," she said. "I want to add purpose." A murmur ran around the room. Someone muttered, "She's lost it." Clara stood. "My resignation letter is on your desk. Effective end of quarter. But before I go, I'll finish what I started. The Harmony Initiative will launch. Fully funded, fully operational. Fully open to every child who's ever been told their silence didn't matter." She paused, voice steady but soft. "I know what it's like to be that child." The room quieted. She turned, walked out, and didn't look back. Later that night, Ethan sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the darkened yard. The stars above blinked faintly quiet witnesses to the ache he couldn't name. Mrs. Kim's old minivan pulled up without warning. He stood as she stepped out, a long scarf wrapped around her shoulders like armor. "I heard," she said gently. He nodded. "She told the truth," Mrs. Kim continued. "Didn't run, didn't hide. That counts for something, Ethan. She hurt Mia. She's trying to fix it." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "She broke her." "No, son. Mia's not broken. She's retreating. That's different. You of all people know the difference." He sighed, eyes softening. "She hasn't spoken since." "Then let her listen." Mrs. Kim reached into her bag and handed him a USB stick. "It's a recording. Clara playing in the therapy room." Ethan hesitated. "She didn't know I was there," Mrs. Kim added. "It wasn't perfect, but it was real." At home, Ethan plugged the stick into Mia's music player. He didn't say anything, just pressed play. The sound that came out was rough, uneven, but aching with intent. The melody staggered at first, but found footing as it moved, like someone learning to walk again after forgetting how. Mia didn't move, but her fingers twitched. A breath later, her head tilted slightly, eyes flickering toward the sound. She didn't speak, but she heard it. That was something. The next morning, Clara stood in front of the press. Behind her, the Harmony Initiative banner fluttered in the soft wind. "I once believed silence was strength," she began. "That efficiency mattered more than empathy. That signing my name on a line couldn't break a child." She paused. "But I was wrong. And this," she gestured behind her, "is my apology." Cameras flashed. She continued. "For every child who finds their voice through rhythm, for every parent who needs more than a diagnosis and a pamphlet, this program exists for you. Not as charity, but as restoration." She looked directly at the lens. "And if anyone asks what a weapons manufacturer is doing funding music therapy, you tell them it's because some wars aren't fought overseas. Some are fought in living rooms, in classrooms, in little hearts that don't know how to scream." Back at home, Ethan sat beside Mia as the broadcast played on the small living room TV. Mia watched, didn't blink. When Clara spoke that last sentence, Mia reached for a crayon. Not to draw, just to hold. Her fingers wrapped around the red one, her favorite. And for the first time in days, her eyes shimmered. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Ethan whispered half to her, half to himself. "She's trying to bring the music back." Mia nodded, almost imperceptibly, but he saw it. Hope, quiet, trembling, but alive, had returned. That night, Clara returned to the therapy room again. She sat alone. Then from the hallway the creak of small footsteps. The door opened, and Mia walked in, sketchpad in hand. She didn't say anything. Clara didn't either. Mia crossed the room, sat beside her, and handed her the pad. A new drawing. 3 figures, all holding violins. Underneath, Mia had written just 2 words. Still playing. Clara didn't speak. She just nodded. And for the first time she believed it. Music didn't have to be perfect to be healing. It just had to be honest. They said it wouldn't work. That no one would care. That music couldn't compete with missiles. But then, the video surfaced. It started as a grainy clip Clara Duvall, former CEO of Halcyon Defense, playing a trembling violin solo inside a half-lit room surrounded by walls still scarred by neglect. Her bow moved with effort, her notes sometimes missed, but something in the way she kept playing caught fire. Someone posted it online with the caption, "When silence breaks, healing begins." Within hours, it went viral. Within days, it was national. And by the end of the week, Clara Duvall, once infamous for cutting funding to children's therapy, was being called the CEO who played for redemption. Outside the gates of Halcyon's Northern California facility, cameras lined up like soldiers. Clara stepped to the podium, not in her usual power suit, but in a simple navy coat, her hair tied back, her violin case slung gently over her shoulder. Behind her, a banner fluttered, the Harmony Initiative, where music meets mending. She scanned the crowd, reporters, employees, families before she spoke. "I didn't come here today to be forgiven." She began, voice clear but soft. "I came because silence is no longer an option." A hush fell. "I once believed the only numbers that mattered were in a ledger. I believed that strength came from strategy. But that was before a little girl drew me into her world without saying a word. Before a father taught me that playing a single note for one child is more powerful than commanding silence from 1,000 adults." She opened her violin case, pulled out the old worn instrument, then looked back at the crowd. "There's no policy that fixes the past, but there is music, and presence, and courage, and sometimes that's enough to begin again." She raised the bow and played. No accompaniment, no sheet music, just one soul playing toward something better. Back inside the facility, the old therapy room was no longer empty. Painters had brightened the walls with soft colors, sky blues, gentle yellows. Sound-absorbing panels lined the ceiling. Low shelves held drums, guitars, and art supplies. At the center of it all sat a hand-carved wooden sign, the Violin Room. It wasn't just for Mia anymore. It was for every child who'd ever needed a space to feel heard. Ethan stood by the door watching Mia explore. She wasn't holding his hand. She didn't need to. She walked on her own, gently trailing her fingers along the new violins lined on the wall. At the far end, Clara stood waiting, violin in hand, eyes steady but kind. No security, no photographers, just her. When Mia reached her, she looked up. Clara knelt eye level. "Hi, Mia," she said softly. "Would you like to play with me again?" Mia tilted her head, didn't speak, but she lifted her own violin, smaller, lavender-painted, worn with love, and nodded. Ethan stepped forward then, voice quiet. She brought it from home. Clara's eyes shimmered. They sat in a circle, Clara, Ethan, and Mia, and began to play. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be, because it was together. Later, as the sun dipped low beyond the industrial rooftops, Ethan walked Clara to her car. "I read your resignation letter," he said. She smiled faintly. "Bit dramatic." He shrugged. "No more than playing violin in front of a boardroom full of weapons execs." She chuckled. Then more seriously, "You know they only approved the program because of public pressure, right?" "I know," he said. "But you didn't do it for approval. You did it for her." He paused. "For all of them." Clara nodded, fingers tightening around her violin case. Ethan stopped walking. "I was wrong about you," he said, turning to her. You're not just trying to make things right. You're choosing to stay in the room when it's uncomfortable." He smiled, slow and sincere. "And that's rarer than genius." Clara didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I never wanted to be forgiven quickly. I wanted to deserve it, slowly." Ethan looked at her a long moment, then offered his hand. "I don't forgive you because you fixed it," he said. "I forgive you because you didn't run." Their handshake lingered. More than a deal. A beginning. That night, the town held its first community open house at the Violin Room. Children from the neighborhood trickled in, some nervous, some excited. Parents followed, some still skeptical, some openly emotional. Mrs. Kim sat by the corner tuning instruments with her usual no-nonsense grace. Come in," she told a shy young boy. "We don't care if you know how to play. We care that you showed up." Clara stood near the entrance holding a clipboard now as volunteer coordinator, not as CEO. A young mother approached her nervously. "You're really staying?" Even without the title, Clara smiled, especially without it. The mother looked past her to the music room. "My daughter hasn't spoken in months, but she's here because she saw your video." Clara's voice almost caught. "Then we're already winning." Outside, Ethan watched through the window Mia curled beside her sketchpad coloring softly as music played in the background. He exhaled. The kind of breath you only release when you're no longer holding the world up alone. Mrs. Kim walked over, nudging him with her elbow. "You know, she said I've been teaching music for 32 years. I've seen talent, technique, brilliance." Ethan glanced at her. But the rarest thing is someone who plays not to be heard, but to help someone else speak." She nodded toward Clara inside. "She's learning." Ethan followed her gaze. Clara was kneeling beside a boy struggling to hold a bow. Her voice was low, but her presence said everything. "She is Ethan said. So am I." And in that small town inside that small room surrounded by once broken strings and half-healed hearts, something impossible had begun to bloom, not redemption, not fame, not even music, but belonging. And it sounded like 3 violins finding harmony in a world that finally listened. The doors were open again. Soft music floated through the violin room like sunlight through lace curtains. The colors on the walls were warmer now, no longer institutional beige but soft pastels painted by volunteers touched by children's hands. In the far corner, Mia sat cross-legged on a round mat sketchbook, open violin resting gently across her lap. Her crayon moved slowly, deliberately, the way a child draws when she's not just coloring but saying something. Next to her drawing there were 3 stick figures again. One held a violin. One held her hand. The third wore a navy blue coat and smiled. Clara stood just outside the doorway, frozen. She hadn't been here since the day she walked away from the title of CEO. She hadn't expected to be back. Not as a guest, not even as a volunteer. She certainly hadn't expected Ethan to be the one who asked her. But last night the text came through. "We're here tomorrow, 3 p.m. You should come. Mia's asking about you." Nothing else. Just that. It was enough. She stepped inside. Ethan looked up from where he was tightening a loose peg on a beginner's violin. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her as if seeing her not for the first time, but for the first time clearly. Then, simply, "You came." Clara nodded. "You asked." He set the violin aside. That was Mia's doing. She kept pointing at her old drawing. Said the music was missing someone. Clara smiled faintly. "I'm still not sure I belong here." Ethan's voice was quiet. "That's the funny thing about belonging. It doesn't always wait for permission." Mia stood up. She walked slowly, but without hesitation, her steps sure and centered. She reached Clara and held up the sketchbook. Clara looked down. There they were, 3 figures, the same as before, but now they were holding hands. And above them, in blocky, colorful letters, Mia had written, We play together." Clara knelt, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Is that what you want?" Mia nodded. Then, for the first time in weeks, she spoke. "Will you play with us?" They sat down in the middle of the room. Clara, Ethan, Mia, 3 violins, 3 hearts. One shared silence that no longer felt empty but expectant. Ethan began first a slow, grounding melody, warm and deep like old wood. Mia followed her notes, light and curious, dancing between his lines like fireflies on water. Clara waited. Then she joined the first note uncertain, but the second stronger. And the third in harmony. It wasn't performance. It was presence. It was forgiveness not declared, but felt. And somewhere in the middle of the music, Clara realized this was the answer she'd been chasing for years. Not control, not redemption, not even approval, just connection. Afterward, they sat in the quiet that only comes after something real has been shared. Clara glanced at Mia, then at Ethan. "She's incredible." "She is," Ethan agreed, but not because she speaks now, or draws better, or plays music. He looked directly at Clara. "She's incredible because she kept her heart open, even when we adults kept closing doors." Clara lowered her gaze. "I closed too many, and now," Ethan said gently, "you've opened one. That counts." She looked at him. "Even if I caused the silence," Ethan exhaled. "I don't forgive you because you fixed everything. I forgive you because you stayed." That line landed, right in her chest. Not dramatic, just true. They shared a small meal in the back room, simple sandwiches, lemonade fruit cups, paper plates, folding chairs. But Mia had insisted they sit at the round table near the window. The same one as before, the one from that first awkward lunch. Only this time, it wasn't awkward. Clara folded her napkin carefully. "You know, I used to think sitting still was wasted time." Ethan chuckled. "You never would have guessed." She smiled. "Turns out I was wrong. Sitting still, listening. Being here now, that's the hardest work of all." Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "The best work, too." They watched Mia twirl gently in place, holding her violin like a dancer holds a candle. "I thought I needed to be perfect to be useful," Clara said. "But maybe it's okay to just be present." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "That's what Mia's been teaching me for years, and I'm still learning." He paused, then added with a small smile, "She's a tough teacher." As they finished lunch, Mia walked over, handed them both a fresh drawing. It was the same 3 figures, but now there were notes swirling above them like birds in the sky. In the corner, she'd written in careful, wobbly handwriting, "Thank you for staying." Clara blinked back tears. Ethan smiled. "She's got your timing, knows exactly when to say the thing that matters most." Clara looked at the drawing, then at him. "She got that from you." The sky outside was beginning to turn gold. Clara stood brushing crumbs from her lap. "There's a spring festival next week, isn't there?" Ethan nodded. "They're holding it in the town square. Mrs. Kim's idea. Wants the violin room kids to open with a performance." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is she planning on dragging me on stage?" "She's not planning to," Ethan said, standing beside her. "She already did." Clara laughed, a real full laugh, the kind that came from the belly, not the mask. "Then I better start practicing." Ethan offered his hand to shake. She took it, but instead of shaking, he just held it a moment longer. "See you at the table," he said. Clara nodded, and this time, when she walked away, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was walking into something real, something earned, something that sounded a little like home. The spring sun had a different quality that morning. It didn't just shine, it blessed. The town square, usually quiet and utilitarian, had transformed. Paper lanterns danced in the breeze above, hung from lines stretched between telephone poles. Folding chairs filled up fast, the laughter of children mixing with the distant hum of tuning instruments. At the far end of the square, a makeshift wooden stage stood beneath an old sycamore tree, its branches still waking from winter. On the front edge of that stage stood a simple hand-painted sign, Harmony Festival, where all voices matter. Clara stood behind the curtain smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. Not a power suit, not a press appearance, just a soft navy dress Mia had picked for her. It looks like music, the girl had said. Like calm. Clara had smiled at the time. Now she clutched that smile like a lifeline. Behind her, Mrs. Kim peeked through the curtain. "They're packed out to the corner bakery," she whispered with delight. "This town hasn't gathered like this in 10 years." Clara took a shaky breath. "What if I miss a note?" Mrs. Kim tilted her head. Then, "Let it miss." That's how children know it's real. In the front row, Ethan adjusted Mia's violin shoulder rest. She stood still, eyes wide, soaking everything in the sun, the buzz, the music in the air like static before lightning. "You ready, little moon?" Ethan asked gently. Mia didn't speak. She simply reached out, touched his cheek, and nodded. One word followed. Together. Ethan swallowed. Always. A hush fell as Mrs. Kim stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "welcome to something a little bit messy, a little bit brave, and entirely full of heart. The Harmony Ensemble is not perfect. It was never meant to be. What you're about to hear is not just music. It's proof that silence can be rewritten with patience and people and presence." She smiled, and sometimes with a little violin. The audience chuckled softly. Then the curtain lifted. Clara stood stage left. Ethan stage right. Mia stood between them, not quite in the center of the stage, but somehow exactly where she belonged. The crowd held its breath. Clara raised her bow. Mia closed her eyes. And Ethan began. It started as a whisper of melody, low, wooden, familiar. Ethan's tone was steady anchoring, the rhythm of a man who fixed machines but healed through habit, a sound like soil beneath bare feet. Mia followed next, a soft tremble at first, then rising like a question becoming an answer. Her notes moved with instinct like a bird testing its wings, then soaring as the stage around her faded. Then Clara. Her entrance was hesitant, one beat too late. The audience heard it. But no one flinched, because when her note landed finally, it shimmered. Not flawless, but felt. It wrapped around Mia's melody and kissed Ethan's harmony. And suddenly they weren't 3 players. They were one. A trinity of wounds and wonder and wordless devotion. A family not built by blood, but by choice. As the piece swelled, a few audience members reached for tissues. One woman whispered, "That little girl. She wasn't speaking last year." A man beside her murmured, "The CEO's up there, too. Gave it all up for this." By the final notes, people weren't just watching, they were remembering. Their own silences, their own missed notes, and the music they thought they'd never hear again. The final note floated into the air, lingered, and landed. The square erupted into applause. Clapping whistles, hands above heads. People stood, strangers hugged. One child near the stage reached up toward Mia as if trying to catch the last note in the air. Mia bowed. Ethan followed. Clara stepped forward unsure, until Mia reached back, took her hand, and tugged her into the bow. 3 figures, 3 arcs, 3 stories braided into one final note. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin and lanterns glowed softly overhead, Ethan and Clara sat on the edge of the stage feet, dangling like kids at a dock. Mia danced in the grass nearby with other children, her violin case now covered in stickers and a bright ribbon. Clara glanced sideways. "You were right," she said. "The work isn't the hard part." Ethan sipped his lemonade. "No." Clara shook her head. "The hard part is staying. Even when it hurts, especially then." He looked at her for a long moment, then offered quietly, "So, Are you staying? She smiled. Not the CEO smile. The human one. I think she said for the first time in my life, I already am. Mia ran up, held out something in her palm. A small silver charm, a violin no bigger than a thumbprint. Clara took it startled. For me, Mia nodded. Then whispered, You made music. Clara felt the tears come, the kind that heal not break. She knelt, hugging Mia gently. I just followed yours. As the sun dipped below the rooftops and the stars blinked awake, the music didn't stop. Children hummed, teenagers strummed. Elderly folks tapped their canes to rhythms remembered from decades past. And in the center of it all, one girl danced barefoot, chasing light surrounded by people who had once lost their way and now found it in her. Clara looked at Ethan. He looked at her. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Because some things are said best through music, and some endings are really just beginnings. Not perfection, not applause, just three people brave enough to show up and play the next note together. Now let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Are you joining us from a small town like Ethan's, a big city boardroom like Clara once ruled? Or maybe from somewhere in between where you're learning to find your own voice too? Drop your location in the comments. We read every single one. Let us know what part of the story touched your heart the most. Did you have a favorite line that stayed with you like a melody? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that just might change your day or your heart. Because here we don't just tell stories. We remind each other that love music and second chances are always worth listening for. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.